please, for the love of Nolan's cheeks, watch at least up to episode 6 of season 3 of Invincible if you have not done so before. If you're a comic fan, I'd appreciate it if you respectfully tag anything even hinting beyond that episode with a comic spoiler disclaimer before you launch into the conversation. Damn, they have cooked making season 3 of... No joking, Invincible is one of my favourite stories of all time, even outside of Cape Comics. And as someone who loved the journey so much the first time, when I picked up the comics in 2012, I have been head over heels with the adaptation. The reason us comic fans have been so damn hype for Blue Suit Era is we get to see our boy face an absolute gauntlet of ethical dilemmas that shake him more than having to fight his dad. I see you doing that double take. What? How the hell does a fight with a dragon have more narrative density and weight than fighting your father? No stress, my hot take will make sense when we revisit these series of events chronologically. And in doing so, I want to highlight a few things to tee up my analysis of great storytelling that extends beyond Invincible. My analysis was inspired by Season 3 only, but for the sake of showing that the writers knew that they would end up tackling some interesting themes, I'll outline Seasons 1 and 2, but feel free to skip ahead if you don't need the refresher. Let's go back to the fight with Nolan. Up until this point, Mark has been learning the ropes of his powers, and the entire time, he does the straightforward thing with no need to worry about thinking. He sees a rock guy running away from the police? Easy. Just fight him. No questions asked. When Mark goes to space, he prioritizes human life per the mission, unknowingly making a blunder and bringing back a disguised Martian. But that is a background narrative thread that simmers away, and is completely unreasonable to blame Invincible for Shakespeare's recklessness and self-interest. That phenomenon of the domino effect echoes to the second encounter with Titan, in which he pleads for Mark's help. While Mark gets demolished, he did not anticipate his help and the involvement of other heroes would lead to Titan filling the power vacuum. For the second time, the ripple effect of his actions are not on his radar. Despite his good intentions, there was no way he could notice the ripple effect his influence has. He merely has not learned to be wary of how he affects the world. It is important that Mark is not aware of the things slipping under his radar. It also makes the gut punch of finding out his father is willing to murder millions of people quite rightly shake his worldview for the first time. If he knew of the mistakes he had made prior to his fight with his dad, it would undermine the shock of the universe being more adversarial to his black and white viewpoint. This destruction of how Mark sees things during his yellow suit era is an essential prelude to Angstrom living. Angstrom is incredibly flawed himself, full of hubris that he should be this receptacle of collective knowledge, resorting to association with the maulers of all people. And he doesn't just slide but plummets into villainy thanks to his insanity caused by the accident Mark was a part of, and the subsequent obsession with Mark once his mind is clearer. Following that, Mark settles into his identity as a young man, keen to carve out his legacy independent of the devastation Nolan caused. Cecil is more than happy in using Mark to fight Darkwing, and harnessing Mark's punch-first, romantic custody, ask questions much later approach. Once he's summoned to 3X, naturally there is a capacity, thanks to Mark's human side and upbringing encouraging compassion, to comprehend that a cooled-off Nolan is not hostile and still worth the hug. Mark's willingness to listen allows Nolan to be honest when he explains the scenario with Oliver and the incoming Vulturites. Nothing more worth giving amnesty than having a baby brother that faces execution, right? In addition, Indrissa gives wise advice. She tells Mark,
Thraxan lives are short compared to yours. Our culture doesn't assign blame. We only look forward. We will rebuild, Mark. Count on that.
This reverberates through many scenes depicting human nature for the rest of the episode. Like when Mark talks with Debbie and she cycles through an array of mixed emotions. And then that's followed by... I'm gonna sneeze. A It's no coincidence that immediately after that, Donald and Cecil have a heated exchange over the lies Cecil has fed Donald. As Cecil says,
"There's no time for existential angst."
Finally, it's followed through by Rex's pep talk to Eve about her guilt over the park she built being dangerous. Personal drama and life updates aside, the relative status quo and simple certainty of being a superhero that can punch his problems away cannot be returned to because it's upset by the Sequids arriving. Unlike the invasion of the Flaxlands, the concept of blame does somewhat apply, especially where Shapesmith is concerned. It's a prelude to the cause and effect of Angstrom. When Angstrom Levy confronts and fights Mark, it is significant that Mark doesn't know who he is initially. This is in contrast to Russ becoming a Sequid host or Nolan murdering the Guardians of the Glow. In both instances, there was no way Mark could ever know due to people being deceptive, so of course a rookie hero couldn't anticipate it. However, the onus is on Mark for not asking questions and launching into a fight, at least when it came to Angstrom. Narratively, Angstrom is the epitome of an unstoppable force that smashes into Mark to course correct him from continuing to make mistakes and leaping to conclusions. By Mark killing Angstrom, it's not only just a symbol of Mark killing his own innocence, but of him closing the book on being able to be ignorant of the world not adhering to his black and white philosophy. His trajectory has been nudged, and he's not quite ready to go through the gauntlet of Season 3 because he still believes murder is never okay. Nonetheless, the new era is upon him. Season 3 started with a hiss and a roar with 3 great episodes dropping all at once, and it delved into the incompatibility of Mark and Cecil's philosophies. This could not happen with a Mark who was not terrified of his newly found capacity to use lethal force. I've seen enough discourse on who is right from both sides to know that it can get weirdly heated. So much so that people resort to putting words in the people they disagree with mouths. Jumping to conclusions about how you saw a Mark sympathizer say this means all people who side with Mark agree on something, or making things up about what those who agree with Cecil have said is beneath us. It's a show for adults, and the goldmine that is Robert Kirkman's writing, combined with the writer's room for the show, has peak nuance in this issue. We should celebrate that instead of being at each other's throats. However, Cecil was right, don't you'll know to be true. Those of you who are new to this part of the story, I get it. When I read it, I had goosebumps about how much of a devil Cecil is. Finishing the comics didn't change my opinion. There are many fans who finished the comics that have always believed Cecil is wrong. But just taking time to digest the scenario was what did it for me. Look at it this way. Batman has had many compelling stories across the years. Some of the best are about the environment and the adversity Batman encounters, especially the adversity of a twisted reflection which informs the reader of the principles at play. Two-Face can either be a gimmick-obsessed villain who uses twins to rob Gotham's second bank of all the... Or he can demonstrate the folly of single-mindedly pursuing vengeance and justice, and how someone may start wanting to do a lot of good and appear as a paragon of justice, but cross the line when things don't go his way, and how a dual identity may be consumed by one personality. I could list more examples, but for the sake of brevity, I'll return to talking about Mark. Regardless of your thoughts on if Cecil was right or not, let's examine the structure of episodes from episode 2 onwards. It's clear that the flashback of Cecil thinking it is not permissible to work with murderers enshrines a parallel between Mark and him, and it demonstrates that the universe is one that erodes at black and white morality. We know that Mark is invincible in terms of his tenacity and spirit, and because he's the main character, we're encouraged to perceive Mark as one who would be resilient to compromising on this. Nonetheless, we can consider this a cautionary tale. Will Mark be so stubborn to uphold his lack of tolerance of murderers that he will retread the path Cecil walked? In episode 3, right out the gate, the show makes an active attempt to humanize Tethered Tyrant and Megalomaniac, depicting a willingness to try and be contributing members of society. It's not Mark's job to fix the systemic issues that drive people into poverty and keep them in it. However, It does demonstrate Mark's biases on perceiving the role superheroes play against criminals when he sees these people as a training exercise for Oliver. Punching such problems does not benefit society, just reinforces the status quo. Speaking of Oliver, his arc across Season 3 obviously puts Mark into a de facto parenthood role. With the direction things go in Episode 3, it's an inversion of how Nolan clearly has no issues killing Earthlings and was in a position of authority. In many ways, Oliver represents the version of Mark if Mark did not have the years of living among humans. When Oliver kills the Maulers and Mark argues with him, I think it's a beautiful moment when Oliver tries to fly away because the conversation is just too much for him. Because Mark tackles him and it's almost like an embrace and like a hug. It's almost as if it's a moment of understanding is the only way to heal this rift. Naturally, we are more vulnerable and emotionally available for our family. It's why, even with the atrocities Nolan has performed, Mark gave him the benefit of the doubt that he was worth talking to calmly. Mark cannot afford to extend the same courtesy to Cecil. Sure, there is a power dynamic at play. Mark would be swatted like a bug if he decided to not be diplomatic. But Mark didn't indicate he was feeling in danger.
So? Why is that bad? Do you ever think that maybe Dad was right?
I think it's fascinating that in the comics Mark responds. Maybe in the show, there will be a flashback to this argument. It's no mistake Oliver opposes Mark's philosophy, as the versions of Mark who ardently agree that Nolan was right are being assembled by Angstrom. Episode 4 to me is a Ghost of Christmas Future type narrative. By showing that Mark is hurtling towards a reality in which somehow his philosophy has enabled putting Mortal in charge of the planet, it kind of indicates that something's going on because they've disagreed so many times. So maybe the universe is showing Mark that his trajectory is not conducive to leaving the planet behind better than he found it. I also reckon that Mark having this side adventure mid-date with Eve is a reminder of how Mark has come across familiar faces from other timelines before. His trajectory was altered by that, presumably for the better, by heeding what could happen. While King Immortal does not fit with the pattern of symbolically being a reflection of Mark very well, a future Mark is irrefutably a reflection, even if he is absent. It's actually great storytelling, as this alleged Emperor Mark can only be inferred. I think it's incredible that maybe holding on to black and white philosophy Mark may end up creating another monster who has no qualms about killing anyway. Did future Mark's philosophy shift and he knows about King Immortal's tyranny and doesn't care? Is future Mark ignorant of Immortal's insanity, just like he was ignorant of Angstrom? Does future Mark not intercede because he actually remembers killing King Immortal in his youth, and this future is an inevitability? No matter what, Mark must tread carefully, it seems. In episode 5, Debbie cuts into her pancakes like a degenerate. This is symbolic of how both sides of Mark are corruptible, and while Debbie is presumably a positive influence on Mark's attachment to Earth, he has seen war crimes. While Debbie is the main villain of episode 5, there actually is a B-plot villain if you look closely. Titan. For all intents and purposes, Titan is not a reflection. However, he continues his own pattern that the more Mark deals with him, the more complicated Titan is. Now the boss, Titan represents the immovable object that is the reality of how many shades of grey there are in the world of Invincible. In short, Titan's plan demonstrates that no matter if Mark will work with a criminal with a sordid past, there are puppeteers that will use this Mark who refuses to engage in moral complexity and the end justifying the means.
Look at it now. No more murders, no more crime. Folks no longer afraid to live here.
No more murders or crime except for yours.
That's not how I run things. Ask your friends in the GDA if shit isn't better now than a year ago.
In episode 6, Powerplex is a problem you can't punch. What a glorious cosmic joke for this point of Mark's career. Also a joke, Powerplex's delusional belief that Mark can never redeem himself. Right? Wrong. Powerplex is an excellent twisted reflection of Mark. He's an exaggeration of Mark's argument against Cecil. D.A. Sinclair must pay for his crimes. Cecil, you can't work with him because he hurt someone I care about.
You can't keep getting away with it! You can't keep getting away with it!
Powerplex works at the GDA, which is a parallel to Mark working with Cecil when Darkwing and Liberty and Man saved the heroes. It's glorious. I actually love it. Functionally, Powerplex demonstrates how rigid morals can drive a narrative despite compelling arguments starting with, but what if you are wrong? That's why, much like Oliver, Mark stopping him is not through antagonistically fighting, but by restraining him in a hug. Superheroing looks nice, and it's a great power fantasy, but we know that exerting will through violence only causes collateral damage. Mark changes tactics to try and best solve the Powerplex problem, and it kind of works. Because Mark is not agreeing with these twisted reflections, we can appreciate that he is maturing. Often in stories, we are presented with main characters and we love them, but we shouldn't let our love of them determine we must agree with everything they do. If the story is about growth or dissent, the characters that oppose our main character when counseling them are not bad people. Sometimes the main character listens, sometimes they don't. When a character reaches a junction of how to react and settles on, we're done, for good. There are stories about those who don't change. Just look at Titanic. The hero plows through the evil ship that harbors an illicit love affair. Invincible as a story differs. Mark does change. Despite his and Debbie's mentoring of Oliver and telling him that killing is bad, he did kill King Immortal. With this in mind, the thing that makes Invincible great past the Blue Suit era is that we get to be carried along in his journey. I can't wait to see more fans engage in the story and discuss the lessons Mark learns from encountering influences on his journey, regardless of if they resemble him or resemble those he disagrees with, becoming the version of Mark the story ends with. It's one hell of a ride. And take it from me, it's worth rethinking past your first impression.